As winter approaches, Canadians need to find ways to overcome the cold and snow. We shovel the snow, turn up our thermostats, and cover the roads and sidewalks in salt. But is our use of this common seasoning at the expense of something even more important? In Waterloo, the use of de-icing salt has been a topic of great concern for hydrologists in recent years. The trend of increasing salt concentrations in groundwater has been observed since 1973, and this trend was only addressed in 2003 when regulations were set in place. Since Waterloo relies heavily on groundwater, these trends are concerning for the average person. The impacts on nature are heavy too, since salt concentrations have also been increasing in lakes and ponds, where it causes problems for aquatic life and the delicate balance of nutrients that exists. Most de-icing salt is the same type of salt that is used as table salt, simple sodium chloride. The salt lowers the freezing point of the water, so the ice on the roads melts into water that can easily clear off. The problem is what happens after the salt is taken away by the water.
The primary pathway for road salt to contaminate groundwater and surface water in the environment is basically in the wintertime we put a lot of salt on roads and sidewalks and parking lots. As the snow melts, the salt enters the environment. It gets carried with the melting snow water into streams, and then it also percolates down into the groundwater.
For humans, especially in the region of Waterloo, the biggest problem is when the salty water gets into the groundwater. The region of Waterloo draws 80% of its drinking water from the groundwater, and we do this to minimize the amount of treatment needed to clean the water. The government has what are called aesthetic objectives for the water we drink.
We're affecting our drinking water supply, and so as chloride concentrations increase above a certain point, we can't make use of different sources of water. Above that level, water doesn't taste very good. There are certain people, if the road salt that's used is sodium chloride, if the road salt that has a lot of sodium in it, people with hypertension or high blood pressure, that can be a big issue for people with those sorts of things.
The corrosion caused by road salt is also a major concern. These can cause pipes and wells to not fall under the operational guidelines in Canada, which are enforceable and ensure that chemical levels do not cause damage to pipes and other water treatment and distribution equipment. Meanwhile, the salt is even more damaging to natural ecosystems. Animals, creatures, and plants that have adaptations to living in fresh water can be devastated by a change to a saltier environment. The salt water that ends up in lakes and rivers can either disrupt their natural functions or just lead directly to their deaths. This is just the obvious issue, but there has been research on another big problem that salt can cause. In large bodies of water, the mixing of the water is what brings nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus that everything needs to survive, across different depths of the water. When salt is added to water, it makes that water heavier. This heavier water now no longer wants to mix, creating stagnant water that can become unable to support life. All of this is made worse by the fact that the chloride in salt is conservative, meaning that there is little to no breakdown or use of salt components in biological processes.
Chloride is considered a conservative tracer, and so it doesn't break down very easily. Obviously, with stream flow, the water is going to be moving downstream. It'll leave one spot and go to another. The chloride that enters groundwater, on the other hand, it just tends to accumulate. It won't. The concentrations won't decline at all. It'll just steadily increase over time.
So, if this salt is such a problem, then how can we get rid of it? Well, there are problems with stopping use of salt altogether. Since Canada is dependent on cars, salt is a necessity on high-speed roads to avoid accidents. In January 2024, the Waterloo region reported 162 crashes during a single snowstorm, showing how important keeping the roads safe is. It may also become an accessibility issue, since those with limited mobility will struggle to use snowy or icy pavements. Chemical alternatives to salt do exist, such as at airports where a different compound is used.
Road salt, it'll corrode the metal on the planes, and you don't want your planes rusting and falling from the sky, so they'll use different compounds, typically some kind of something that has glycol in it or something like that. It's just a different sort of a problem.
The solution, when you consider this, is to reduce salt to only the required uses, instead of completely removing salt as a de-icing option altogether.
What currently exists in the region of Waterloo, I can't speak to other areas as much, but they've really worked hard on trying to be a little bit smarter about how they apply salt to different roadways, and so it doesn't. They've classified roads at different levels, and so that the highways tend to get the most salt, and then neighborhoods probably don't get very much at all.
As we continue to consider our impact on the natural world, we must take precautions to be sure that we aren't individually causing negative impacts. Being sure to avoid overuse of salt in our own driveways is a start, and keeping vigilant to any future threats will be how we protect nature from ourselves.